The house was quiet in the way only old houses can be, filled with creaks that spoke of memory rather than movement. The wind tapped gently against the window panes, and the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower buzzed like a faint reminder of life continuing beyond these walls. Inside, everything was routine, predictable. Maybe too much so. The ticking clock in the kitchen was the loudest voice most days, a metronome that seemed to measure the distance between hearts in this house. I stood at the sink rinsing dishes, my hands deep in warm water, watching soap bubbles swirl and burst like thoughts I couldn't hold on to. Behind me, the sound of the television drifted in low murmurs from the living room. A laugh track, canned and hollow, echoed off the walls. My stepson, Daniel, was lying on the couch just as he always did after school, one sock on, one sock missing, earbuds dangling from one ear, his phone lighting up every few seconds with messages he never let me see. He was 17, close to the age when boys either start becoming men or start becoming strangers. I never really knew which one he was choosing. He hadn't always been this silent. When his father and I got married 5 years ago, Daniel had been a quiet but curious boy, asking me questions about everything: where I grew up, what music I liked, whether I thought dogs understood words. But something had changed. Or maybe it had never been real. Maybe he'd just tried for a while, the way kids do when they're told to play nice with new adults. Either way, the questions stopped. The light in his eyes had dimmed into something. I couldn't read anymore. His father worked late these days, longer hours, more out-of-town meetings. That left Daniel and me to orbit one another in silence most evenings. We weren't close. We weren't enemies either. We were something colder. Indifferent. I'd cook, he'd eat, I'd clean, he'd disappear into his room. Our conversations rarely reached past 4 words. Dinner's ready. Thanks. Good night. Night. But that night, there was something unusual in the air, a tension I couldn't name. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even visible, but I felt it. The way he moved slower. The way he looked at me just a second too long. The pause before speaking. The way he pressed his phone screen down on the coffee table as if to hide it from the light. I had been telling myself for weeks that nothing was wrong. That this was just what teenagers were like. That distance didn't mean anything more than mood. But as the sun dipped below the window, casting long shadows across the dining room floor, I couldn't shake the sense that something was waiting at the edges of our quiet life. Something that would soon make silence feel like safety we never appreciated. And Daniel, he was humming under his breath. A song I didn't recognize. A sound I hadn't heard from him in months. The house settled into its nightly stillness around 10:30, the kind of quiet that makes even the refrigerator's hum seem louder. I turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the soft glow above the stove, and walked down the hallway toward my room. My bare feet moved silently across the hardwood floor, and I paused at Daniel's door out of habit. A thin strip of light leaked from the bottom. He always left his lamp on, said it helped him sleep. But tonight, there were voices, not raised or urgent, but murmuring, uneven. At first, I thought he might be on a call, his voice low and serious the way teenagers talk when they think no one is listening. I lingered, not to snoop but to understand. Something in me had been reaching for a thread, a clue, anything. There was a name I didn't recognize, mentioned twice. A girl? A friend? And then silence. I stepped away quickly, hoping the floor hadn't betrayed me with a creak. I had no right to be standing there. But before I reached my room, his door opened behind me. Slowly, quietly. He didn't say anything, just stood in the hallway, hoodie on, one hand gripping his phone like a lifeline, his face unreadable in the dim light. I turned around, startled, halfway between an apology and a question. He looked at me, not startled, not even surprised. Just tired. The kind of tired that belongs to people far older than 17. "I'm going out," he said. His voice was steady. Too steady. I blinked. "Now? It's almost 11. He shrugged. "It's important." My mind scrambled for something to say. There were rules in our house, rules his father and I had agreed on, but suddenly, they felt like thin paper in a storm. I opened my mouth, but before I could respond, he added, "You don't need to wait up." Then he walked past me. No backpack, no jacket. Just the hoodie, the phone, and that distant look. The front door opened and closed with the softest click. I stood there in the hallway long after he was gone. The silence felt different now, not peaceful, but hollow. Like something had been pulled out of it. The light under his door was still on, casting a faint yellow glow across the floor. I wanted to call his father, to say something, to ask where our boy had gone. Not his body, but something else. But I knew he'd be on a plane or in a hotel, and besides, what would I even say? Instead, I sat on the stairs by the front door, listening for footsteps that didn't return. My hands were cold, and I didn't remember when I had started wringing them. A storm was coming. I could feel it in the way the wind pressed against the windows like it was looking for a way inside. Morning arrived without ceremony. I hadn't slept. I'd drifted in and out of shallow awareness on the living room couch, listening for the soft click of the door, a voice, any sign that Daniel had returned. But the house stayed still. At 6:17 a.m., I heard the knob turn. I didn't rise, just listened. His footsteps were light, but purposeful, like someone trying not to wake anyone, like someone who didn't want to be seen. He didn't know I'd been awake all night. I waited until he closed his door. Then I got up, stretched aching muscles, and walked quietly to the kitchen. The coffee pot clicked on like it always did, too loud for how fragile the silence felt now. When I poured the coffee into my cup, my hand trembled. I gripped the handle harder. Everything I touched felt breakable. I didn't ask him where he'd gone. I didn't have the words to. Not then. He came into the kitchen around 9, hair damp from a shower, face tired, expression blank. He poured himself a glass of juice like he did every Saturday. He said nothing. Neither did I. The clink of his glass on the counter was the only sound between us. Over the next week, the air between us thickened. He came and went more often. He didn't eat dinner with me anymore. His eyes never quite met mine. I caught glimpses of him in passing, hunched over his phone, pacing on the back porch, laughing once too loudly at something I couldn't see. There was a strangeness in the way he moved, the way he smiled at nothing. A disconnection, as though a wire that once barely held us together had quietly snapped. I kept waiting for him to speak first, for him to offer some piece of explanation that would bring us back to something familiar. But that moment never came, and every day that passed made the waiting feel more absurd. One night I opened his door, not out of anger, not even out of suspicion, but because I couldn't take the not knowing anymore. The room was clean, too clean. His bed was made. A framed photo of his mother sat face down on the desk. That detail punched through me harder than I expected. I turned it back upright. It wasn't mine to touch, but I couldn't bear the idea of her face being hidden like that. A notebook lay half open on the bed, pages filled with thick black marker lines, words scribbled and crossed out again and again. I didn't read them. I just stared at the mess of ink, loud, chaotic, emotional. There was pain there. Pain he hadn't spoken aloud, and guilt bloomed in me for not being the kind of adult he could bring it to. That night, the one he slipped out into without permission, kept repeating in my mind like a dream that shifted. Each time I remembered it, I'd see him at the door, hoodie on, lips pressed together, and every time I imagined it, his face looked older, harder. It's strange how time passes when you don't know what to do with it. Weeks became a blur of ordinary things: folding laundry, watering plants, chopping vegetables with mechanical precision. Daniel was still here, technically. He slept in the same room, left the same cereal bowls in the sink, wore the same hoodie, most days. But there was a distance that had grown roots. We lived in parallel, like strangers caught in a routine they didn't remember choosing. He spoke less than before, if that was even possible. I caught only fragments of his voice now. Quick phone calls behind closed doors, quiet mutters in the hallway. His father asked once, during a brief weekend home, if everything seemed okay. I told him Daniel was just being a teenager. He nodded. Neither of us wanted to dig deeper. I stopped waiting for explanations. The night he left without permission never came up again. I told myself he was safe, even if I didn't feel it. I told myself it was a phase, even as I watched him become someone I couldn't recognize, not because he was doing anything terrible, but because I couldn't see into him anymore. Whatever parts of him I had once glimpsed, the curious boy with a half smile and wide eyes, were tucked away behind some invisible wall. Some nights, I stood by his door again. I didn't listen this time. I didn't intrude. I just stood, there, quietly, hoping maybe he would open it on his own. He never did. His room changed. Slowly. Subtly. The childish posters were taken down. The shelves rearranged. The photo of his mother vanished one day. I never asked where it went. Maybe he put it in a drawer. Maybe he couldn't look at her anymore. Maybe he couldn't bear anyone else seeing how much he still missed her. One afternoon, I found myself holding one of his old drawings, something he'd made in the early days when we first met. It was a pencil sketch of a dog, messy and incomplete, but surprisingly good for a 10-year-old. I remembered how proud he'd been when he gave it to me. I'd framed it once. Now it sat in a drawer, dust clinging to the glass. I almost put it back where he could see it. Then I didn't. He comes home later now, says Les. But when he walks past me on the way to his room, I sometimes hear a sigh. Quiet, almost nothing. And I wonder if he feels it too. The weight, the fracture, the thing neither of us can name. I still make him dinner most nights, even if he doesn't eat it while it's hot. I still knock before entering his room, even when I know he won't answer. I still hope he'll tell me something one day. Anything. A story, a truth, a moment that explains what changed. But for now, I only have that night. And the look in his eyes before the door closed.